Hello, everyone. Today I want to look at the game from the U.S. Chess Championship. I believe it was round 9 between GM Zherebukh with the white pieces and GM Hikaru Nakamura. Now, I haven't been commenting on these games from the U.S. Championship too much because of the extensive coverage done by the St. Louis Chess Club site by Yasser, Maurice, and Jennifer. So I didn't want it to be too redundant, but this game was interesting to me because of the rare line that was chosen by White. So the game started off with e4. Nakamura had the black pieces and chose the Caro-Kann defense. Again, he's coming off a loss to Alexander Onishuk in the previous round, so he was definitely focused on this in this game. Zherebukh plays d4, d5. This is all main stuff. D takes, knight takes. So we have a main line in the Caro-Kann where white gets more space as he occupies the first four ranks. But black has a very solid position that is difficult to break down and takes patience and good handling to secure an advantage. Bishop f5 main line. Of course, there's other options. Knight g3, bishop g6. Now here, usually knight f3 is played, along with this idea of h4, h5, etc. Here, Zherebukh chose the line knight at h3. Now this is definitely one of those sidelines in the Caro-Kann, and basically it's designed to first bring the knight to f4 and be able to quickly secure the bishop here, because normally the bishop would tuck itself at h7 after h6, but also it's designed to avoid the theory and the forcing nature of the Caro-Kann, because this line probably goes about 20 or 25 moves deep, depending on the variation. After knight f3 and knight d7 and h4 and all of that stuff. So he's obviously not saying he's not prepared, but he probably just wants to avoid the theory. And this knight h3 line was a line advocated by a GM named Sergei Tivyakov, who I think has the most games in this line. And for those of you who don't know, the main line would begin with knight f3 and then say knight d7, for example. Then you get this h4, h5 idea coming, h6, h5. The bishop drops back. And I don't know what this is called now. It used to be called the Spassky variation. Perhaps it's still called that. Bishop d3, bishop d3, queen takes d3. Then there's moves like e6, queen c7, queen a5. Let's say e6, bishop f4. Then you have all this stuff going on. Check. And it just goes on and on and on. Castle. And again, there's a lot of theory. So you can just go 20 moves automatically in this line if you play the Caro-Kann. So it's understandable to me why Zherebukh decided to avoid all of that and play this line, which is slightly offbeat and doesn't give black too many worries, however. So knight f6 and knight f4 is played. Again, real simple idea, gaining the bishop here. Knight d7. Now even here, and this is what I'm saying, this line is pretty harmless for white. Even right here, excuse me, for black, even right here, black can already strike with e5. in the position. So if you know anything about the Caro-Slav pawn structure, then you know that the e5 break, if you can get e5 in, then you pretty much equalize most of the time. Because usually it's hard to get e5 in and you settle for c5 and get that break in. But if you could get the e5 break in, especially at move 7, um, you're pretty good. So for instance, d takes e5, and then you go into this endgame. You get the pawn back. And it's pretty doggone close to equality here. So Nakamura obviously didn't want to go into that, where he's not trying to draw with the lower rated player, but he wants to beat him, so he keeps the pieces on the board. But I just wanted to show you that as an option. Bishop c4. Queen c7. And here we can see that Nakamura has intentions on going that way. And I like this plan by by black, because it it kind of crosses white's plans a little bit, in that he wants to take the bishop here, but in taking the bishop here, black will simply capture like that, and then this rook on h8 will be freely developed in the position at some point. So there's some games where black castles on the king side, and then the idea of just grabbing the bishop here in a symmetrical position works out pretty good for white here. The only thing about castling queenside is that with the bishop here, the f7 pawn becomes vulnerable. And then, of course, after e6, with the knight on f4, then black has to be careful of watching these squares e6 and f7 for any type of potential sacrifices. So castles, and there's e6, and now you can kind of see what I'm talking about, the sensitivity of these squares. There's already like attacking motifs based on sacrifices that creeps up if black is not careful. c3 is played. Another move that's played in this position also is just dropping the bishop back to b3, because sometimes it's useful for white to get in this c4 advance and take control over d5. And then black usually has this plan of a5 and a4, driving this guy away. So those are like two ways that white can handle the position. He chose c3, which is of course very solid, but not too challenging to black. If we take stock of the center, we see black has a nice hold on d5, of course, which is what you expect in these positions with pawns on e6 and c6. And he also controls e4 for now. All right, and that's the downside of playing c3 and having bishop on c4, is that the control over this square is very difficult to challenge. But he's playing for peace activity, and again, these squares can become very vulnerable. And for white's control in the center, right? And we see this pawn here, sturdy and reinforced on d4. So d4 is very solid. That's the benefits of having that pawn on c3, having a very solid pawn chain. And of course, he has a good observation on e4, but e5. But he better be careful, because with the queen on c7 and knight on d7, he's preparing for the push to take over white's section of the board. Right now, his king is in the middle, so it's kind of sketchy. But If white is not careful, black will push e5. Bishop d6 again. So for all intents and purposes now, black is controlling these three squares because white cannot, if you were able to take this knight and just put it here, white cannot safely land a piece on e5 now. He's lost control because it would just be captured. And that pawn would be captured. So you have to be very careful in the center. So besides controlling the center, Nakamura is also threatening this piece. And so he's almost forcing white to carry out his idea to exchange this bishop. There's queen f3. And now Nakamura breaks with the move c5. Now when I was analyzing this, my first thought was I didn't like the move that was played during the game, which was d takes c5, because I felt that it just helped black. He achieved this break real easy without any type of penalty. I was feeling that d5 had to be played, but after d5, we have e5, which is practically forced. Knight takes g6, h takes d6, and the position is still closed in nature. Black is going to castle queenside, and this pawn is not really going anywhere for the time being. It's going to need a lot of love and care and nurture. But so this is an interesting position here. I think it's still equal. So d takes c5 was played. Bishop takes c5. Now the bishop drops back because the bishop is unprotected here, and you have these ideas. Say for instance, bishop takes f2 with check. So this is one of the reasons why I didn't like the move, as black develops like an initiative here. So now bishop goes here, nice diagonal, forces white to do something defensive. There's the castle, and it's kind of like what to do with this knight, because I mean black can just come back here with the bishop, challenge this guy. e5 is coming, so it's kind of like he's saying, hey, you put the knight on f4, what are you gonna do? So he takes, knight takes g6, and here I just feel that Zherebukh just went kind of downhill and started making inferior moves. He used a lot of time on this clock. I have the timestamp here. At this point, Nakamura was moving fast. He had 1 hour and 11 minutes on this clock. Zherebukh only had 30 minutes at the time, so he was definitely having trouble in the opening. H takes g6, so free development. The rook never had to move. So that can't be good. And look at the coordination of the pieces. Right? This knight is now frozen, so something definitely went wrong. The knight cannot move. Okay. Bishop f4. And it's not a matter of Zherebukh not seeing that black could just play e5, which he did, but I guess he just couldn't think of anywhere else to put the bishop. And this idea of knight e5, he just, he probably just was, didn't want to deal with it. I mean, the position is getting kind of stiff. So for instance, bishop g5, knight e5. And then say queen f4, knight d3. You see, it starts getting, queen c7, king takes c7, rook a b1, and then black is real passive here. So difficult days ahead. So he put the bishop on f4, and perhaps he figured I'd rather have the pawn there than the knight coming in the position. So e5, and The bishop moves to e3, so he wants to trade. All right. So the problem with this move is there's some tactical, tactical situations here. I just want to go back for a second. I was looking at this move, knight g6. I didn't like the move, by the way, because again, it just freely develops this. But I had looked at this, just giving up the bishop for 2 pawns, but it's not adequate. It's I don't think it's enough. So for example, at the knight e5, say queen e4 and queen e7, knight d5, queen g5, rook takes, and black just has too much activity. These rooks are all, not in the game, and black has good compensation for the exchange. 2 bishops, all of the pieces are activated, so it would just be too high of a price to pay. So he chose knight takes g6, but there has to be a better move, and it has to be a move like queen e2 or something like that. You can't just open this file for this rook like that. So that's what I would say, queen e2. But it's hard because after, say, a move like bishop d6, threatening this knight, it's like, where do you put the knight? If you don't want to make this exchange, what do you do with this knight? Where do you go back here? That doesn't look right. Because then, for instance, after a move like h4, getting ready to challenge this guy, you're forced to weaken this king side, So you probably end up, after a move like this, having an exchange here anyway. So maybe now knight takes g6, but then bishop e3, and I like black's position a little better, but it does, because it seems like he has a lot of pressure over here on the king side. But back to the game. All right. Naka castled. Knight takes g6. H takes g6. Bishop f4. And Naka gets an initiative. And that's the type of player you don't really want to give him initiative. He has that dynamic style. Queen e2 was played here. And I just want to show you, for instance, if bishop f4, that's just a blunder. The e takes. And white just loses a piece. So he played this move, queen e2, which is obviously an oversight. His best chance was to play queen f6, but queen f4. But it's counterintuitive because anybody can see bishop d6 coming after that. But the idea is to keep the queen protecting over here on the king side. So for instance, after bishop d6, queen g5, and reinforcing these the pawn and pieces on the king side over here. Black is still better at this point. He has moves that he can make. For instance, like knight e5. Right, he can still build his attack. And this knight, of course, can go right into that weakened square. Okay. Just for an example. And there's a trouble on the horizon here. Okay. But instead, he made the natural looking move, queen e2. Right? Because we're taught to get our queen out of trouble, right? It's a higher ranking piece. Keep keep your queen, out of range of enemy pieces. So Nakamura made this exchange. Bishop takes e3. Zherebukh wants to keep his pawn structure intact around the queen side, around the king side. So he plays a natural looking queen takes e3, and overlooking a tactical blow based on the pinned nature of this knight. He plays rook takes h2. Okay, and the problem is if king takes, then there's a good old-fashioned fork. This is why instead of queen takes e3, he has to play pawn takes e3. Now he's still in dire straits here because, again, the same theme mentioned before, the knights are coming in to the weakened squares. Okay, so it can look something like this. Maybe knight f1, still keeping an eye there. But it's rough, looking rough for white. This is not what you set out to set out for when you first started the game. So queen takes, tactical blow, and rook fd1. The most natural move in the position is played by Nakamura. And here, Zherebukh gets desperate, just grabs a pawn. What else to do when you're going down in flames? You might as well grab some material on the way down and just e3. Of course, the idea is to undermine the good old knight here. So he grabs another pawn. And after knight g4, he resigned. There's just too much going on at this point in the position. Just to demonstrate, if he tried to say, I don't know, it's hard to find something here. Let's just make a move like queen d3 here with the idea of just trading off, right? But it gets the queen out of the way, and he wants to trade off queens on the next move. Well, just rook h1 will just end the game here. And you might think that after knight takes h1 that black's attack is done. But what happens is, because of the good old knight being right here, you can use one of these sacrifices, right? Like a drawing sacrifice, which draws the king back to this critical square. Right now you can look at it as a mate in one problem. Okay, and you can see that very clearly. Just queen takes h2, or queen to h2, checkmate. And that's the power of having those rooks lined up. And let's mark that tactic in your mind too. Sometimes you can draw, right, the enemy piece, right, to a focal point, right? This is the focal point. So you just figure, how can I get the king over there? And by sacrificing 5 points worth of material, right? That's what the old turgid books say, right? That the rook is worth 5 points. By sacrificing 5 points worth of material, you can checkmate the opponent. So, seeing all of that, after knight g4, GM Zherebukh, who had the game of his life a few rounds ago against Fabiano Caruana, now succumbs to a fired up Hikaru Nakamura, coming off a disappointing loss in the previous round. So that is it for the analysis of that game. I hope you enjoyed it. And please like my videos, comment, and subscribe. Again, check out my end game videos. And I will see you next time.